Okay, so let's talk about The Secret. I mean, we all remember that book, right?
Oh, definitely. It was huge everywhere.
Totally took the world by storm. This idea that, your thoughts shape your reality.
Law of attraction, yeah. Hugely popular.
But I think for a lot of people, the science behind it always felt a little, well, fuzzy.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite there.
For putting it mildly, for some critics, perhaps. But what if we could look at it differently?
How so?
Through a biological lens,
Mm.
specifically genetics.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's actually what we're doing today. We're taking a deep dive into a chapter from Homo 100 Genome Compass. It's by Dr. Minsiab Lee, who's a genome expert.
Ah, right, Dr. Lee.
And in this chapter, he looks at The Secret, not really as like a self-help guru, but as a geneticist.
Okay, so applying molecular biology and heredity to the law of attraction.
Exactly. It's a really different angle.
So our goal here isn't to, debate if thinking about a sports car makes one appear in your driveway.
Probably not, no. Fun thought, though.
Right. But more to unpack these potential biological connections that Dr. Lee writes about. Could our thoughts, our beliefs, actually have a real tangible effect on our biology, like down at the gene level?
That's the core question the chapter tackles.
Okay, let's get into it then. The chapter kicks off by mentioning the sheer number of thoughts we have daily, something like over 60,000.
Yeah, it's a staggering number. But it quickly pivots to say it's not just any thought, it's the core beliefs.
The deep-seated ones.
Precisely. Those ingrained patterns. The chapter suggests those are what might be wielding real physiological power.
And how does it propose that happens? Chemically.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. It talks about how positive thoughts can trigger neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin.
The feel-good chemicals, we know those.
Right. We usually link them to mood, feeling happy, bonding, which they definitely do.
But the chapter goes further.
It does. It suggests these chemicals don't just stay local in the brain for a mood boost. They can actually influence the environment around our genes throughout the entire body.
So like sending signals out from the brain based on our thoughts.
Kind of. Think of it like this. The thought starts as an electrical signal, a chemical reaction in the brain. Standard stuff.
Okay.
But then those signals, or the chemicals they release, travel. They reach cells all over.
Yeah.
And here's a really interesting bit Dr. Lee explores.
Yeah.
These signals might act as epigenetic instructions, basically telling our genes how to behave.
Wow. Okay, that's a leap from just feeling good. That brings us to epigenetics then.
Exactly. It's central to this whole perspective. The chapter explains it clearly. Epigenetics is the control system, right?
It manages which genes are switched on or off.
Yeah, without changing the actual DNA letters, the sequence itself. The analogy I like, maybe similar to the chapters, is your DNA is like this vast library of books.
Okay.
Epigenetics is like the librarian deciding which books are taken off the shelf and read
Yeah.
and which stay put. It doesn't rewrote the books, just controls access.
And the chapter mentions specific ways this librarian works, the mechanisms.
It does. It touches on DNA methylation that's like putting a do not disturb sign on a gene, silencing it.
Okay.
And histone modification. Histones are like the schools our DNA thread is wound around.
Right.
Modifying those schools can either wind the DNA tighter, making genes hard to read, or loosen it up, making them accessible.
So controlling accessibility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it also mentions non-coding RNAs, like miRNA, which are more like fine-tuning dials, adjusting the volume of a gene's expression.
Got it. But the key thing here, the chapter argues, is that this whole system is really sensitive to, well, us and our environment.
Highly sensitive, yes, to external factors like nutrition, sleep, exercise. We know those affect gene expression.
But also,
Crucially, our mental stimuli, our thoughts, our emotions. The chapter really emphasizes this connection.
does it give examples? Because that sounds big.
It does. A classic one is chronic stress. We know stress leads to cortisol release.
Right, the stress hormone.
And the chapter points out how sustained cortisol can epigenetically dial down immune system genes, maybe turn up inflammation genes. That's a direct biological link from a mental state.
Okay, that makes sense. We see the physical effects of stress.
But then it flips it. It talks about accumulating research suggesting positive emotions, gratitude, joy, hope, that feeling of expectation.
Yeah.
These might actually mitigate or even reverse some of those stress-induced genetic changes. The idea is that our internal emotional state could be actively shaping our gene expression patterns.
So this really reframes that whole law of attraction idea, doesn't it?
Completely.
Yeah.
The chapter sort of contrasts the pop version, thoughts attract the world,
Hmm.
with a more biological take, more
That's
like
right.
thoughts change me, and the change me interacts differently with the world. It's internal first.
Ah, I see. The change happens inside, influencing our biology, and that changes how we experience or shape our reality.
Precisely. The chapter suggests we're constantly, often unconsciously, fine-tuning our gene expression with our dominant thoughts. It's not like you think a happy thought and instantly rewrite your epigenome.
It's the pattern, the consistency.
Exactly. The cumulative effect of our mental habits.
And this internal tuning, as the chapter puts it, could then ripple outwards.
Plausibly, yes. It could influence our behavior. Maybe we're more outgoing or more cautious. It could affect our judgment, how we react emotionally, even our facial expressions, our perceived energy.
Which in turn affects our relationships, the opportunities we notice or create.
All these little pieces that make up our day-to-day reality. The chapter argues that reality isn't just objective external stuff,
It's also our internal response.
our biological and psychological response to the external stuff. So in that light, the law of attraction starts to look less like magic.
And more like a principle of biological self-regulation, guided by our mind.
That's the perspective Dr. Lee is offering in the chapter, yes, based on epigenetics.
Okay, wow, but then the chapter goes even further, right? Into evolution.
It does, and this is where it gets really mind-bending. It talks about adaptive epigenetic inheritance.
Inheritance, meaning passed down.
Potentially. It's the idea that some of these epigenetic tags, these changes in gene activity, prompted by environment or maybe even mental states, could possibly be passed to the next generation.
Wait, so experiences or mental states could leave a mark that gets inherited?
It's a complex and debated area, but the chapter touches on it. If thoughts influence gene expression patterns, and if some of those patterns could theoretically occur in germ cells, sperm, or eggs, or very early in development,
Then it changes how we define inheritance.
it certainly prompts a rethink. The chapter is clear. Thoughts don't mutate the DNA sequence itself. The fundamental code isn't changing.
But the operating manual for that code could be.
That's a great way to put it. The instructions for how and when the genes are used might be altered, and perhaps, just perhaps, some of that alteration could be heritable.
So, from an evolutionary angle, could positive thinking actually be adaptive, like a survival strategy?
The chapter floats that very idea. If our internal state, driven by thoughts and hope, can tweak gene operation in a way that benefits survival or even prepares offspring slightly better for the environment,
Then maybe optimism isn't just a personality trait, but something deeper.
potentially part of an evolutionary toolkit. Our minds influencing biology to aid survival across generations. It's a fascinating, if speculative, extension.
Which brings us back to the chapter's main point about the secret.
Right. The conclusion is pretty bold. It suggests the law of attraction isn't necessarily just fantasy or wishful thinking.
But could be a biological reality we can observe at the epigenetic level.
Exactly. It reframes thoughts not just as mental fluff, but as actual physiological instructions influencing genetic function.
It makes you think about people who just seem resiliently optimistic. Maybe they're not just lucky.
Or just good at affirmations. The chapter hints they might be, consciously or not, engaging in a form of biological tuning through their mindset.
Tuning their genes.
In a manner of speaking, the analogy used is like being an orchestra conductor, choosing the music each day. The genes are the written score.
And our thoughts are the conductor's baton, deciding what gets played.
That's the imagery. And it ends with that really concise quote, "Thoughts are energy. Energy can change genes. That change becomes a form of answer."
Powerful stuff. Okay, so wrapping this up, this chapter from Dr. Lee's Homo 100 Genome Compass gives us this really compelling biological perspective on the law of attraction.
Yeah, suggesting these potential mechanisms via epigenetics, linking thoughts, beliefs, gene expression, maybe even heredity.
It definitely moves the conversation beyond simple self-help into, well, molecular biology.
It really does.
So a final thought, perhaps, for you listening. Could actively cultivating positive thought patterns be more than just mood management? Could it be a form of, like, proactive genetic self-care?
With potentially far-reaching effects on our own well-being, and maybe even, thinking long-term, our evolutionary path. And what are the ethics if we can intentionally influence our epigenome this way?
Definitely something to think about. A fascinating intersection of mind and molecule.